Welcome back to What's in a Game. I'm Grace Jean, here with our prodigious guest from the Alex Hoops YouTube channel. How are you doing today, Alex?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be here, talk some Thunder Nuggets, and appreciate you guys having me on. I'm really excited for this.
No, we're really excited to talk about the Denver OKC matchup with you. I know from both your YouTube channel and your Twitter timeline how detailed you are in breaking down games. So I thought, especially for this particular matchup that is very, I think, interesting, both schematically and philosophically, that you'd be, a great guest for this topic. So, okay, before we dive into our topics, just a couple of quick programming notes. So, obviously, we're recording this right after the Nuggets take on the Thunder for the second game in their little baseball series in Oklahoma City. And next week, I think they play the Lakers this weekend, but we won't be recording until the next two Lakers games from now. So look out for us after that Lakers game, middle of March, which I guess is close to the middle of next week. And also please do us a favor and hit the like and subscribe buttons. It really helps us out with the algorithm as we try to grow the channel. So Alex, you have this awesome YouTube channel where you do all kinds of film breakdowns on players, on teams, on schemes, and all kinds of concepts, right? I was wondering, how did you get into covering the NBA in particular, and then how did you decide to start your YouTube channel? What inspired that?
First of all, I appreciate the kind words. I really do. Second, the way that I got into covering the NBA was I graduated college in 2020.
Oh my gosh.
Which, for all of the people listening who also graduated college in 2020, it was kind of hard to get a job. And like a lot of people, I was just collecting unemployment, and I was like, I got a lot of free time right now. I could probably start writing some articles. So I started doing that on the side just for fun.
Just freelance or for any particular outlet?
Couple of fan-sided websites.
Okay.
I wrote for Behind the Buck Pass for a little bit. The Warriors one, which the name is escaping me right now. But I did some stuff for those two sites, which is funny because I'm not a fan of either of those teams, but it was just what I could get work doing at the time. So started doing that. And then I have a background in video editing. It's something I did throughout high school and college. And I was like, at one point, I'm writing these articles that are 1,500, 2,000 words long, and I know how to edit videos. Why not just put them together?
Video essays. Let's go.
Exactly. So it was just a natural progression. And I've always loved basketball. It's always been my favorite sport to watch. It's been my favorite sport to play. I'm someone who has a hard time sitting down and focusing and paying attention to things like a lot of people. And basketball is really the only sport that can keep my attention start to finish. Except when they have, all the annoying stoppages and dead balls and stupid fouls, but different discussion. But yeah, I've just always loved basketball and love talking about it.
So I know you talk about all of the different teams, but I know in particular when you and I interact online anyway, it's almost always on Thunder and Timberwolves things. Is one of those teams your primary team when you say you weren't a fan of the Warriors or the Bucks?
So I am a Thunder fan. That's my number one team. I've been accused of, I actually, back when the Bucks won the championship in 2021, a lot of people thought I was a Bucks fan, which was not true. Chris Middleton is my favorite player, and that is why I would talk about the Bucks so much. But OKC is my number one team. My dad's side of the family is from Minnesota, so I've always had kind of a adjacency to the Timberwolves, and grew up watching a lot of them. But Thunder are number one for me. You can actually see today, I think today is the anniversary of Rudy Gobert getting the NBA shut down, right? I think that's right.
I
But
don't know the date, but
that behind me is the ticket to that game. I was there when Rudy Gobert shut down the NBA. That was my first NBA game I had ever attended in person, and I didn't get to see it. So, big Thunder fan, still haven't seen a game.
patient zero. For people that have been following the channel for a while, they know that I'm like relatively new to really following the NBA as deeply as I do right now. Dating back to the 2023 playoffs, and your videos, Alex, were some of the most helpful tools for me in terms of learning things like especially defensive schemes. Like I had no idea what good NBA defense like constituted before those playoffs. I was all about the shot making and all of that. So
that's what I love. Whenever someone says that they learned something from one of my videos, I'm like, yes, I did my job.
yes, you did a great job with those video essays. And I'm a like voracious consumer of all kinds of video essay type content on YouTube. And I think you do a great job with that. So everyone should definitely go and check out Alex's YouTube channel. Alex Hoops, right? Like that's the name of the channel. All right, cool. So let's move on to a couple of NBA news items before we jump into our Denver Nuggets breakdown. Top of the agenda here is Kyrie Irving out for the remainder of the season and possibly next season as well. He tore his ACL last week in a game against the Kings, I believe it was. Nico Harrison unleashed a really, special kind of curse on the Dallas Mavericks franchise. It's actually gotten so bad that the New Orleans Pelicans are actually better in their last 10 games than the Dallas Mavericks right now. So I'm like, oh no, did the New Orleans curse transfer to the Dallas Mavericks? What do you think Kyrie is going to end up doing with his player option this summer? Because I think both he and the Dallas Mavericks are in a very, very specifically fragile place right now. Obviously Kyrie, because of being injured for this season and next, right? So he could either enter free agency this summer or next summer. It's not a good, situation for him. And the Dallas Mavericks, who went all in on the Kyrie and AD experience by, trading their franchise star for Anthony Davis. What do you think about the situation that those two parties are in a couple of months?
So I talked about this a little bit on Twitter when the Luka trade first happened. And I was like, I think the number one thing that I want to know the most is how Kyrie feels about this trade. Like if I could hear Kyrie give his honest, unfiltered, non-media trained opinion on the trade, I would be thrilled, because I'm sure there's, in my head at least, there's no way that this trade didn't rub him the wrong way. Because everything that we'd seen was their relationship was one of the best relationships Kyrie has had with a teammate in his entire career. For this to happen especially the way that it did, where it wasn't even like this messy public breakup that we see teams have with their star players. It was just so like cut the cord and no hesitation. It was like,
and the aftermath
whoa.
Too.
Exactly. The way they just continuously, and like, this is my whole thing with it. I get the money of it all. And, I think the money is important to talk about. But the thing I keep thinking about is you see a franchise do what they did to Luka. There's no way he's not thinking, well, when are they going to do that to me? And are they going to throw me under the bus and start airing out my dirty laundry when they trade me? It's like, I would want to get out of there as soon as possible. Now, the money is where things get a little bit weird, but I have it written here. He's going to be making $43 million next year. And to me, 1 year, 43 at how old is Kyrie right now? 33, 32?
32 years old.
Because to me, 32-year-old Kyrie, you could opt in and get $43 million, or you could hit the free market and get I could see Kyrie getting 3 years, 70, 80 million, 4 years, 90, 100. I don't know exactly
Even
what
with
dollar
the
amount
team
I'd put on
basically
him.
factoring in that they're not going to have him for next year while he's rehabbing the ACL.
That's just prior to the ACL. I'm like, Kyrie's definitely going to decline. Now
Yeah.
this happened. I'm like, this is just what value. Well, that also makes the player option more interesting because it's like, if you do opt in, yeah, you're getting $43 million, but you don't even know if you're getting another contract after that because no one's seen you play. You're coming off an ACL. It's like, I genuinely don't know what the smarter business decision is here because both of them have a lot of unknown.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I thought that the question of Kyrie's summer and what it would mean for both him and the Mavs organization was more interesting. Well, more unknown, I would say, not necessarily more interesting before this ACL injury, because I agree with you. I thought that he had all the reason in the world to decline and either get a lot from the Mavs or from somebody else and get out of that organization. But now with this injury and the timing of it being so, like, it's not like he's out for the season and is going to get to play, maybe even play his way into shape next year and, play up to a level where if he entered free agency next year, that's, then he could play for a contract from the Mavs or from somebody else. I feel really bad for him. I think that he's as big, maybe not a bigger loser than the Dallas Mavericks fan base, but pretty close to the biggest loser in like the way that all of this went down now with this injury, which, some people are putting on minutes load. I don't know, but he was clearly carrying that team a lot and was in a position where he was going to have a lot of power this summer, and now it's gone. And so is, his hermano in Luka. Obviously AD is there, and those two have a close relationship as well, right? The fact of their friendship has been a topic of conversation in, the news articles about this trade. So, does that soften the blow a bit of having to stay there? It's an interesting position that the Mavericks are in, because it's not really good for them either way. I guess him declining might give them a little bit more flexibility, but they're not getting a max contract slot back if he declines, right? If he
I had to
opts in, yeah, go ahead.
If I had to go off my gut, I honestly think he'll still decline.
Really? Okay. You think the basically the emotional aspect of it, the human side of this, ignoring the immediate financial implication, is that strong?
I think nowadays, like, I look at other contracts around the league, like even Jimmy Butler, for example, the contract that the Warriors just gave him, much older than Kyrie. Not obviously, you talk about the skill difference between Kyrie and Jimmy Butler, but like, Kyrie's game is not, I wouldn't say it's as reliant on, like, Jimmy Butler's athleticism is super important to him because it's one of the aspects of his game that allows him to get to the free throw line so much and open things up for himself, keep defenders honest. With Kyrie, it's a different type of athleticism that, yes, could still potentially you lose a step, but it's not necessarily quick twitch athleticism. It's more fine-tuned agility, and careful, deliberate movements. To me, I look at the contracts that are being given out now, and I look at the salary cap overall increasing, and then I also look at the human aspect, like you said, the emotions behind all of this. I think Kyrie is in a position where he can have his cake and eat it too, because even if a team is like, yeah, we don't really know what Kyrie's going to look like coming off of a torn ACL, but it's Kyrie Irving. Isaiah Hartenstein's getting $30 million a year.
That's true.
We could give Kyrie $30 million a year for the next 3-4 years. Even though we don't have him coming off an ACL, he's going to need a season to recover. It's like, that's fine. We got Kyrie Irving. I would be surprised if the short-term $43 million while also having to stay in Dallas for what looks like is an impending rebuild. That doesn't look very appetizing to me. I don't know how appetizing that would look to Kyrie at this point in his career.
I think that's definitely for me. Well, we'll see how the playoffs go. The number one story that I'm looking at this offseason in terms of just a bird's eye view of the whole league. So the next piece of news we have is about a team that's related in all of this, the Los Angeles Lakers, of course. So LeBron James is expected to miss a week to 2 weeks, and be reevaluated for a groin strain. It's rough timing as the Lakers try to work out chemistry and gain a rhythm with basically a whole new roster right before the playoffs, of course. And oh no, they lost to the Nets last night. Alex, I have to know, because I have to get your thoughts on this, the perspective from a Thunder fan. One, what was your reaction to the Luka Doncic trade once you accepted that it was real? Well, you can give the initial WTF, but also I want to know, like, what was your immediate thought for the Thunder, like what this means for Oklahoma City?
I mean, as long as Luka is like in the Western Conference, I will always be scared for the Thunder, just because we've seen Luka do a lot with a little for years and years. And it's like, oh, now he has LeBron James on his team. It's like, that's, I don't care if LeBron's 50. I'll still be scared of LeBron James. But
he keeps getting better. Like, he keeps refining other skills so he can stay useful.
It makes me mad.
Like, damn it. This can't go on much longer.
I didn't think it was real when it first happened. I was like everyone, where I thought I was getting pranked. But I woke up and I had a bunch of people sending it to me. I like slept through the trade. I woke up at like 6 a.m. the next day and had a bunch of texts on my phone. And I was like, oh, this must be like
you're in the Eastern time zone. So
I was like, I'm an old man. I go to bed at like 9 p.m.
a.m. is around when it dropped for you.
Yeah, I thought it was getting settled. I didn't believe it, but then when the dust settled, from like a basketball perspective and not necessarily like a Thunder fan perspective, it's like, yeah, this is a great trade for the Lakers. Shoot, you had to give up Anthony Davis, who's great player. He's getting older. You're always gonna have the injury history with Anthony Davis. Case in point, look what happened right after he got traded, which sucks.
And right before, because AD was injured at the time of the trade. Like, he was not playing because of an abdominal injury.
Yeah. And in that game where he got hurt and went down in the first place, it was like he had like 27 points in the first half, I think it was, something ridiculous like that. And it was like, oh, well, the curse is real. And, I feel bad for him, but the Lakers, it's like, oh, cool. LeBron James is going to ride off into the sunset after like this year or next year. And you're sitting pretty with Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves and whoever else ends up hitting on that team. They have some players that I'm like, yeah, you look pretty good, but your teammates are LeBron James and Luka Doncic. Yeah. It's like, I'm probably not going to like Jackson Hayes if Luka Doncic and LeBron James aren't in the picture. But for now, he looks like he's a decent NBA player. Yeah,
no, completely agree with the initial shock and everything. I did think, the Lakers have been on a hot streak. Like I said, they lost last night and they had a rough game against the Celtics, right? But they've been turning a corner for a while now, even before the Luka trade. I thought that the primary adjustment period would involve the defense. But it's funny, like, the offense has really not taken off in any game except versus the Nuggets, because it's the Nuggets defense since the trade. But the defense has been really good for the whole team. Are you surprised with like just the texture of how that's gone for the Lakers since Luka started, playing with them?
There's this phenomenon that happens a lot, and I don't know necessarily how to quantify it. I don't know if there's like even an easy way to quantify it, but there's always this thing that happens whenever a team makes trades.
Yeah.
Where the period, the like 2-week period, 3-week period after making that trade, that team is just like really, and this really only applies to like contending teams or like fringe contending teams. Like it happened to the Mavericks last year when they traded for Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington. We had the whole like last stretch of the season where it was like, holy cow, this team's insanely good. They ended up going to the finals. I think there is just a psychological aspect of when you trade for a player like Luka, there's probably something in the air in their locker room, in the practice facility, before games, during shoot around. There's just got to be something that everyone just gets really locked in for what they are assuming is a late in the season playoff push. And they're the second, third seed at this point?
They're the 3 seed right now.
And it's like, aside from all the scheme, I think the scheme has been great. Dorian Finney-Smith has been a revelation for that team in terms of his ability to close out and recover, and his rotations and how he communicates on the defensive end. You know, they have good defensive personnel, and JJ Redick, hats off to him. He's getting a lot out of some guys who may not necessarily be in the NBA right now if it wasn't for, you know, their context. All of those factors culminated together at the right time, and I'm not surprised that the Lakers are doing well. I'm also not surprised that there does seem to be a regression to the mean a little bit. Part of that is, of course, injuries. They probably don't lose to the Nets last night if LeBron's not hurt.
They might not lose to the Celtics if he doesn't have to leave that game, because they were making a bit of a comeback.
Oh, yeah.
I attributed that more to the Celtics than the Lakers, but they were like finally figuring out how to score in that game. They were really struggling with that all game. Defensively, I didn't really think they were doing too much that was special. Perhaps you disagree.
No, there's the Celtics have really good just like man-to-man defense, which
Al Horford. Oh my gosh.
Al Horford. Great job. Jalen Brown. He did slow down Luka Doncic to some extent.
A lot.
And that's what you got to do. You just got to, and that's why like people always talk about, oh, Dort is the Luka stopper. It's like, well, he's not necessarily the Luka stopper, but you can tell Luka's frustrated, and that's really what you want to do is just annoy him. And kind of get in his, I mean, as much as you can get into Luka's head, it's like you kind of just got to make him mad. But sometimes that backfires on you. But yeah, I agree. The Celtics, you know, they played them well, but there wasn't anything necessarily groundbreaking outside of like, just good, solid physical defense.
The Lakers are interesting because we haven't really fully seen their offensive ceiling yet, but I feel like, you know, a lot of people think of the LeBron and Luka duo very favorably, first of all. But I think for those that are skeptical, it's like, well, they both kind of do the same thing. So how are you really like creating like synergy there? I think it's very different when you bring together two high level playmakers versus high level like score first guys, which I think Luka is. Well, he was more of a score first guy last year. I feel like he's more looking to pass this year, you know, by Luka standards. But when you have guys that can make plays for each other and others more so than looking for their shot, like I'm just kind of contrasting this with what happens when you bring those two together versus, you know, KD, Booker, and Beal. But obviously Luka and LeBron are both better players than those guys as well. But I think that that's like the conceptual difference between those two kind of constructs.
I completely agree. And I will say another thing that sticks out whenever I watch the Lakers is LeBron has not necessarily become, because he's had stints in his career where he's been in somewhat of an off-ball role, but I'm surprised at how effective he is with his off-ball movement and his positioning, and like, okay, you know, here's some space that I need to fill. Just like little things. And you know, Matt and I on the Media Pass, we always use the phrase institutional knowledge, where you've just been in the NBA so long that if you play basketball all the time for 22 years, you're probably going to figure out a few tricks here and there that allow you to, you know, not necessarily luck into, but find your way with 10, 15 points a night just because you know where to be at the right time. Whenever something's happening on this side of the floor, I need to be in this spot. Whenever this is happening, I need to be here. Just little things like that. And LeBron's great at that stuff. He was already great at just like feel for the game, but now it's all of like, oh, okay, I don't have the ball in my hand. Where should I be? And he's great at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when he's highly engaged. Like you mentioned, the, post-trade period when everybody really locks in. And I do think that that's been on both ends of the floor. And for LeBron, like you mentioned, his off-ball role offensively, but defensively, I think he's been such an important anchor for them. I guess right now, just on paper, he's like the best defender on this team now, and he's had to be. And I think he's been doing it at a crazy high level. I think he's been just watching the games. You can see how much effort he's expending in doing that. And I just kind of wonder how long he can keep it up just, in a row in terms of trying to make a late playoff push. But you can never count this guy out.
No. And specifically with the defense, I was going to do, I might still do it. I haven't decided yet. I was workshopping a video specifically about LeBron's defense, and I started watching film for it and just watching like games and seeing what I could find out. There were some possessions where I was like, he stood in the same spot the entire possession. I call it like the Marc Gasol brand of defense, where like he was late in his career with the Raptors and he would take maybe 3 steps on any half court defensive possession the entire time. And it's like, well, yeah, if you're just smart enough to know where you need to be on the defensive end, then you don't need to move that much. And there's the aspect of like how they use their centers, where like him and Jackson Hayes stay pretty much on the low block, like the entire, on either side, just the entire defensive possession. And they just shift around back and forth. Whoever needs to be helping off the weak side, that's who's going to be helping and ready to provide rim protection. And LeBron, you can see him like yelling at his teammates, being like, hey, you need to go here, you need to switch that, you need to do this. And it's like literally like an on-court coach.
Yeah.
Which I guess helps. 22 years of playing basketball. Yeah. You're going to figure some things out.
It's crazy how mentally engaged he can stay on a possession by possession basis right now. But, Will and I are always talking about the same thing with Jokic.
Right.
Yeah. So it's definitely going to be a loss for a blow to the Lakers to lose him for a couple of weeks. Mostly, I think, because they're still trying to work out chemistry, but also because of playoff seeding. But that team is dangerous. I definitely wouldn't count them out of, any kind of playoff push in the West. They're a tough matchup for anybody because you have to deal with both Luka Doncic and LeBron James. All right, last piece of news. Just going to touch on this quickly. Jalen Suggs is out indefinitely. He had to have knee cartilage removal surgery. I only want to mention this because my Orlando Magic, they've been on the struggle bus of late. They were really holding on with injuries to both Franz and Paolo. And I think that Jalen Suggs was pretty integral to that, just being primary or secondary scoring option, depending on who was out. And he's, for all his faults, he is the best point guard on that team. Really the only one that is like that you could classify as such. Cole Anthony's more of a scoring guard. And they are missing him dearly right now. And it was weird because he was missing like 10 games in a row and they're like, oh, it's a quad contusion. I'm like, what? How bad is this bruise? I haven't seen this guy in weeks, and it turned out he needed knee surgery. So that's unfortunate. He won't necessarily miss the rest of the season, but they just said out indefinitely. But especially after how the last 2 months now has gone, I don't necessarily trust the immediate news coming out of the Orlando Magic organization. So he might be out for the rest of the year, and I think that doesn't really bode well for their chances, both in a playoff and potentially in a play-in setting, right? I think it'd be really disappointing for this team if they didn't make the playoffs this year. I think they need to continue to get those reps. So that just kind of sucks, and I wanted to point that out.
Yeah, they've been such a weird team this year because so many people have done different pieces on it. How do Paolo and Franz fit together, and why do the Magic get so much worse when Paolo's, stuff like that, where it's like, okay, we have enough sample size at this point to where this isn't just some random phenomenon. It's like, yes, the Magic are not as good as they are without Paolo when he is on the floor. So we got to figure that out. And the Jalen Suggs missing time now is going to make that question even tougher to figure out, because all of the data sets that we have of the Magic are just like noisy because of all the injuries. And it's just so hard to tell what this team's going to look like 2 years from now.
Yeah. And it's, you mentioned the Franz Paolo fit and how Paolo fits within this team, quote unquote, construct. Air quotes, because I'm like, this team can't score 90 points. Like on a regular basis, They fail to score 90 points in 2025, which is crazy. But Paolo is extension eligible this summer, and that's a pretty big deal. I think because Franz got the extension, Paolo probably gets his, but I do think that another playoff sample would definitely inform, how the front office goes about things, not just like on whether to give him the extension or not, but what to do this off season. I wanted them to get a point guard last summer. They did not do that. Maybe they would choose to prioritize the offense instead of getting another 6'9" center on this team.
They have a type, that's for sure.
They have such a type, and it's killing me right now. But anyway, that's just really unfortunate, and I hope that Orlando is able to figure something out and eke these games out, because it's actually crazy how consistently that team is. I think they're number 2 defensively in the NBA right now, and they're 29th offensively. It's really hard to maintain that defensive level when your offense is that bad. They're constantly having to defend in transition and all of that. They just play so hard, and they are routinely able to hold opponents under 105 points, but then they can't get there themselves. In this NBA in 2025, I think that side of the ball is so impressive that I'm like, guys, please, like, just get somebody who can be like a connective type of creator on offense, who can organize this thing, make it so that they're not 30th in pace.
Oh my gosh.
And if everyone focuses on the shooting, and that is important, right? I think that the Magic are the worst jump shooting team in a decade, which is,
oh my goodness,
it's like just crazy. But matches the eye test. Right? But I think that their process is just so off sometimes, and Franz can't actually fix everything. He makes things like closer to like an average level, but it's not high enough that makes you go, oh yeah, like that's the solve. I think there's going to be some hard looks in the mirror this offseason if they're a serious organization, which, jury's out on that. Let me get into a quick recap of the last 10 or so days for the Denver Nuggets since our last show. They took a pretty bad, in my opinion, a bad loss to the Milwaukee Bucks. It was a lot of missed shots and then like the worst transition defense possibly of the entire season. It was a really bad MPJ game. We were constantly trying to feed him, but he just like couldn't make anything. MPJ shooting game, I should say. Then they went into Detroit and they beat the red hot Detroit Pistons, who I think were the hottest team in the NBA at that point. They had won 9 in a row. It was just a shellacking. I think that it was really because the defense came into play middle of that game. We, in particular, did a really good job on Cade Cunningham, which was nice to see because sometimes we struggle to guard opposing stars when they have like decent supporting casts around them this year for the Nuggets. They went into Boston and it was a morning game, but they basically got shellacked by the Boston Celtics. That game was going to turn into a blowout, and then Denver tried to turn it on kind of late. and they just didn't have enough juice to get it done at the end of the game, which was disappointing. It was another example of Denver, struggling in their late game execution. There was no Aaron Gordon in that game. I think he had an ankle injury from the previous game, and so Russ started. Julian Strawther actually got injured in this game, and he's going to be out for about a month with a knee sprain. Alex, how do you feel with that injury in particular, Julian? How do you feel about Denver being down one more, I have air quotes here, shooter with this injury? Because Julian shoots, like, he's known as a shooter, but he hadn't been particularly efficient, especially recently. But, on a team that is bereft of shooting, what do you think about them losing just one more guy that can do that, at least in theory?
Yeah, I look at the difference between, like Julian Strawther, and I'll use Jalen Pickett as an example because I've kind of gotten a lot of sample of him from the last two Thunder games, which we're going to talk about. To me, the difference is like Jalen Pickett's willing to shoot. Like he's going to shoot. Yeah. If he gets an open shot, he's going to take it. Julian Strawther, if he gets an open shot, he's going to take it. Sometimes if it's not open, he's going to take it, which is fine. You want him taking those shots, but I think Strawther, at least in my watches, he's got an extra element that I think, like Michael Porter Jr., I'll use him as an example. He can put the ball on the ground sometimes, and I'm like not thrilled about it. I'm like, you shouldn't be dribbling here. Like this is a situation where I'm like, this is not your game. You shouldn't be doing this. Julian Strawther, there are a lot of times where I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm fine with you. You have a good solid Jokic screen. You're putting the ball on the floor. You're either successfully or like giving a good effort at getting two on the ball here or creating dribble penetration, getting a paint touch. He does a lot of that where I'm like, outside of Jamal Murray, outside of Jokic, Denver doesn't have a ton of this. And so even ignoring the shooting, just the greasing the wheels on offense that he gives you is where I would feel his absence the most. And I'm just like, that's really important for, not a team that's not only is bereft of shooting, like you said, but kind of lacking in guys who can dribble, like outside of just attacking closeouts. Cause I am going to talk about that when we get into the OKC games. Denver has guys who, they put the ball on the floor on a drive after they get someone to jump. It's like, they'll do a pretty good job getting to the rim and doing something with it. But Julian Strawther can do that in like a ball screen setting, which I appreciate in his game.
Yeah, there's this possession in the Pistons game in particular where it's non-Jokic minutes, I believe. And Detroit is working to deny Jamal the ball after, possession's initiated. I think they go horns, and then Detroit is just denying Jamal, the ability to come and get the DHO. But they're working like a little 3-man action with Julian Strawther, and he's able to come up to the top, grab the ball at the handoff. And I don't even think they're chasing him over. I think they go under the screen, and he's able to just drive and get all the way to the rim. And it's kind of a late clock because they spent all that time denying Jamal, and he's able to bail them out, getting all the way to the rim. And I think about that possession a lot because it's just one of those things where it's like, if like one other guy on this team could do that kind of thing, I would feel maybe a little less tentative about this. Something that I said in the preseason about, the way the roster was constructed and the kind of bet that the Nuggets, and I said this about the Thunder too, actually, how the bet that they're making is that a certain section of their young players were going to develop a particular skill, which is being able to be a secondary on-ball guy that can make some reads, make some plays, try to, score off the bounce, usually in an advantage situation, right? Like the one I described with, that I just described with Julian. And I said that, for the Thunder, it was really about Jalen Williams and Cason Wallace being able to develop those kinds of skills in order to make their offense more resilient when it comes down to, Shea being the primary on-ball guy in those situations. Yeah, so I think it's tough, and I think a lot of people in Nuggets fandom were so critical of, Julian's individual defense and what he does for the team defense that they're looking at this as just an overall net positive. But I do think that he brought a certain juice that is probably going to be missed, and I'm pretty skeptical with how long he's going to be out that he's going to end up in the playoff rotation. So just going through the next couple of games, the Nuggets had, I thought, was a really nice game win against the Kings. They were down double digits almost the entire game, and it really took defense to get them back in the game and then eventually, overtake Sacramento. I really like those games. I like the games where they have to use their defense to get back in it and to win. And then in the Suns game, the complete opposite happened. It was an Old West shootout. Absolutely nobody could miss. The Nuggets were up double digits at half, but I'm like, guys, the Suns are making everything. They're just not taking a bunch of threes. And the Nuggets were just making all of their threes in that first half. And then once Phoenix started to hunt threes, they took 16 in the first half and then 21 in the second half. So almost half of their shots in the second half were threes. That was really tough. Phoenix just, came roaring back really at the end of the game, but it was like a whole half in the making at that point. Booker in particular got hot. It was a lot of like off-screen stuff. Then, of course, Christian Braun hits what should have been a game-winning three at the top of the key, and Kevin Durant hits a corner three to send the game to overtime. And then the Nuggets just decided to be clamps in overtime, right? So, of course, I'm like, that's not at all how the rest of this game went. I think the Nuggets are now 5-0 in overtime games with like a sub 100 defensive rating, and they're scoring like every possession, like a 150 offensive rating in those situations. Jokic put up the first 30-20-20 triple-double in NBA history and had 3 steals on top of that. Alex, did you catch that game against the Suns at all?
I didn't catch it live, but I watched it back, and it was one of those games where you're just like, people get mad. It's unfortunate that people get so mad about these games where like they're really high scoring, and I'm like, I don't know how you can watch that game and be mad about what you got to see.
It's my team, and I'm like, guys, play some defense. But obviously, I'm like, yeah, but also keep making every shot. That's fun too.
Right.
Yeah, no, it was a fun game, especially on rewatch. Like, I know how it ends, and I'm like, okay, it's fun to watch guys, make a bunch of shots. I thought KD was incredible in that game. Aaron Gordon was not as good defensively as I would have liked to see, but he's like really not been the same on that end. In most games this season, we've seen like flashes of it, but with his recurring now calf injuries this season, it's been tough. And then that brings us to the Oklahoma City Thunder games. So in the first game of this baseball series at 11 o'clock in the morning local time, 10 a.m. for me. So that was not fun on a Sunday. The Thunder really put it to Denver in that fourth quarter where they really led, I believe, most of the game. Denver led early, but then the Thunder really took control of the game. And, Denver was kind of keeping it close, but then in that fourth quarter, you just saw them turn the Jets up, really clamp down. And then Denver just couldn't stop them on the other end. I think felt like all of Oklahoma City's threes came in that fourth quarter. And then, of course, the complete opposite game happened the next day where all of Denver's threes came in the fourth quarter, and they did the same thing that Oklahoma City did to them the day before. I want to start by talking about the Thunder matchup more conceptually. In your opinion, what are Denver's main matchup advantages, against the Thunder, particularly offensively, because at this point, defensively is like a big question for Denver in any matchup. Like, what is it that you guys do well here? But offensively, they were able to put up numbers even in that first game through 3 quarters, right? Of course, OKC clamps in the in the fourth. But it was like, okay, well, they're getting stuff here, right? And I even thought, late, they were getting a lot of great looks and just missing. So, like, what is it about the way that Denver was playing offensively that, seemed to, at least in the second game, eventually like overpower this generational defense that the Thunder have?
So one big aspect, and I'm not necessarily saying that this is like a major advantage, but I do want to touch on it because I do think it's a factor, and I do think in a playoff setting, it's an extremely important factor. This idea of rhythm, and especially in a back-to-back setting where you're playing the same team on the road 2 days in a row, same gym, same atmosphere, same context, 2 days in a row. You look at like the fact that OKC was helping off of the same guys, and those guys, like when you consistently help off of them and they're willing to take the shots, there will come a time, it may not happen in those 2 games, but there will theoretically come a time where that shooter that you're helping off of is going to start making his threes. It's a statistical law that it will eventually happen. They will eventually start falling. OKC has a bad habit of living and dying by we're helping off of this guy no matter what, and we're not even going to close out on him, which is, part of my issue is the unwillingness to close out on these shooters at all, even a little bit, to a disrespectful amount.
Well, Denver knows something about that with how we played Lou Dort yesterday.
Right. So, it goes both ways, and I think Denver, their willingness to shoot is really good for something like rhythm. But on a more non-theoretical level, OKC lives in rotation. Like, you watch their defense and you'll see like, oh, yeah, they can send 4 defenders to Jokic when he gets into the paint because whoever is roaming around the perimeter somewhere is going to be able to make the right rotation, or whoever is responsible for making that X out. It's like they're going to make it. And I feel like Denver, specifically yesterday, was good at keeping Oklahoma City out of rotation. Like they were never defensively in a position where I felt like, okay, they're getting Denver to play into their hands. It was always like, oh, Shea is already, Jokic has the ball at the, elbow, and Shea's on the weak side corner, and he's helping off of Peyton Watson. Well, they're not even in rotation yet because Shea is just kind of shading off of him, and Jokic is hitting that pass, and then Peyton Watson's putting up the shot and he's making it. And it's like, well, shoot, OKC didn't even get to do what they wanted to do defensively. It's like they just didn't do what they were supposed to do. They just gave up an open look for nothing. And that's something that I think Denver is really good at against any team, but it definitely plays to OKC, or plays to their strengths against OKC, where it's like, they're in an environment where they have to start thinking, oh crap, like, yeah, I know I'm supposed to help off of this guy, but should I be helping off of this guy? And then obviously what happens after that? You start honoring a Peyton Watson, you start honoring a Christian Brown, which Christian Brown's been a good shooter this year. I'm not even going to act like he's, he's bad at shooting threes. Right, yeah. He's one of those guys, he's going to make 1 of 5 one night and then 4 of 7 the next. It's definitely not. If there's a guy you're going to help off of, it's probably going to be him and Peyton Watson and obviously Russell Westbrook. But those guys can make their shots, as we saw. And I worry about, we'll talk a little bit more about this with OKC, but OKC is very stubborn with their defensive game plan. And I look at last year with a PJ Washington, where it's like, you help off of these guys, they're going to start making their shots. And Denver loves that. Like, yeah, they're like, we know our personnel. We know that these guys have to shoot if we want to win. And like, if they don't make their threes, we're going to lose. If a couple of them make their threes, we got a pretty good shot because we got Nikola Jokic. Against OKC, that scares me because I have not seen a willingness to adjust. And also, I think Denver's size.
You mean adjust defensively?
Yeah, just defensively.
Okay.
And then also Denver on the offensive end, the size bothers me. Size is always going to be something I talk about with OKC, where I'm just like, guys, you are small. And like Isaiah Hartenstein, even defending Jokic, I'm like, yeah, one-on-one, like Isaiah Hartenstein's a good off-ball defender. Positionally, he knows where to be, and he can block shots at the rim. But like one-on-one against Jokic, I don't like anyone one-on-one against Jokic. That's not a matchup that I'll take. Isaiah Hartenstein, I love you to death. You're a great player, but I don't want you to defend him one-on-one. I know Chet can't do it. So I think that's something that really helps. I think in transition, there was a lot of stuff I liked from Denver that Oklahoma City, I didn't realize how good of a transition defense they were until I looked at the numbers today. But
yeah,
it doesn't feel like they're a good transition defense when they're playing against Denver. I'm like, these guys are really good. And I think part of it is just the size.
We saw that that's true because you're constantly generating cross matches, right? Which, puts them in maybe rotations that they didn't want to be in once you, like, let's say you generate them in semi-transition. It's not necessarily like, oh, immediate mismatch, go up for the bucket, but it's like we've already compromised your defense early. There's this meme going around Twitter right now with Mark Daigneault.
I was wondering if we were going to talk about this.
Why don't I let you elaborate on what Mark Daigneault tried to do to control the pace of the game yesterday, which was the game that Denver won.
Yeah, so Jokic inbounds the ball. And if you've watched any Denver game, you'll see Jokic, like, when he is in an inbound setting, like, he wants the ball. Like, he's almost yelling at the ref, like, give me the ball. He's always trying to inbound it as fast as possible because the Nuggets are so good at playing quick, because when you have a decision maker like Jokic, he's going to read the floor, and within a second, he's going to do something with it to create an advantage. And Mark Daigneault, to counter this, was keeping Dylan Jones at the scorer's table to basically perpetually try and keep Denver from being able to play as quick as they wanted, which I don't know what the rules say about that. I've seen some people say it's against the rules. I've seen some people say it's not. Do what you got to do. I understand that, hey, he got to delay a game for it, so clearly he did something wrong, but I respect the ingenuity of trying something so ridiculous. I'm like, I can't be mad at this. It's interesting.
So Daigneault, in the post game, as he's describing his strategy, he really placed an emphasis on, like, I thought the refs weren't doing a good job controlling the pace of the game, and I'm like, that's odd. I don't think that that's a thing that refs are quote unquote supposed to do. But someone else did point out that this is very just akin to Jokic kind of going down and pretending to tie his shoelaces to give the coaches an opportunity to decide to challenge things, or Jokic rolling the ball up the floor. Like, there's all these little tricks that these guys are trying. It was interesting watching Daigneault in the game yesterday because he's normally this, to my eye, this very composed guy, and he gets fired up about stuff and whatever, but he was beside himself, particularly in the first quarter of this game, very annoyed with the way the officiating was going in terms of contact, and also trying to figure out this thing with the pace. It was just a little bit more, he looked a little bit more out of sorts than I'm used to seeing him. And that was true even watching it, not knowing the outcome of this game, because obviously I watched it live. I just thought that was very I thought that was very funny. We talked a lot about all these different ways that Denver has these advantages, and I do think that the size is the main one. I think the size, like you said, just kind of bleeds into other advantages that they could create. So if they decide to play fast in transition, the size can kind of augment that that particular advantage. If they're willing to shoot, let's say MPJ doesn't hesitate on his jumpers, he can just shoot over guys. I actually thought that when it comes to our actual shooters like MPJ and Jamal, OKC did a good job closing out, but they obviously weren't. They were completely ignoring Russ and Christian and Peyton. Eventually they were closing out to Peyton, which was interesting, but they were just making the shots anyway. I saw Chet go for a little cornet contest on Christian Brown in the corner, and that didn't work either. So it was an interesting, I thought it was an interesting set of games, especially because it's not like the role players didn't make shots in the first one. I thought in the first game, it was really Jokic and Jamal that, really struggled in that game. And it wasn't even to necessarily getting to their spots. I thought Jamal generated a bunch of looks that he missed on Sunday and then made on Monday. Jokic, I think, took a like a dramatically different approach to the game. It was a lot of pick and pops and inverted pick and roll on Sunday. And he was generating a lot of threes out of that because that's what OKC was willing to live with for a bit, although they would contest the pick and pop some. He was just missing everything. I think he took 10 threes in the game on Sunday.
And he was 1 of 10, right?
2 of 10. I think he made one late. The 3-point shot has not been looking quite as good over the last month as it had when he was, leading the NBA in 3-point percentage. And it's not just the heaves anymore. So that's definitely an issue. And I think as I was kind of writing up my notes for this show, between these two games, I'm just like, well, like Jokic is going to need to make some shots. Then in game 2, he only took 2 threes. And that was interesting. They basically stopped going to he stopped taking threes off the pick and pop. He was very much like trying to pump fake and drive and generate things out of that more in the second game. And yeah, then Jamal was making shots, and that was good to see. But it was interesting to me that in both of those games, like our two best players were basically generating shots that they can make. Especially Jamal. Like that I think is something that we should talk about, because Will and I did our playoff previews before last year's playoffs, and digging into the Oklahoma City film, the thing that was most surprising to me going through all of the matchups of this team over the last 2.5 years was like Jamal really does get to his spots in this matchup. And he was just not making shots. And yeah, they're all like pull-up jump shots, but those are the shots that Jamal takes. It's not like he normally gets to the rim and then, wasn't in this matchup. And then we saw on Monday that he's able to make those shots. And that was surprising to me because of how good all of these perimeter defenders are in OKC. They have I think the best perimeter defensive core in the entire NBA, and it's not particularly close, although Orlando has tried sacrificing offense at all costs to do so. What did you think about the way that OKC defended Jamal in the last 2 games? Do you agree that he basically just made shots that he missed on Sunday? Or do you think there was different process in getting those shots, or a difference in how OKC was defending him?
In the first game, part of this could, I don't necessarily think any of this was a deliberate thing, but in the first game, I felt OKC was very locked in, like they showed up defensively, like heads in the right place. Execution was quick and decisive. And they were, with shot creators like Jamal, who are trying to get to their spots. A lot of these guys, they're going to get to their spots one way or another. How much can you make them rush to get there? Can you speed them up through their process? Because it's less about like, we want to deny, some guys, you want to deny them from getting those looks in the first place. But with a guy like Jamal, for me, at least, my impression has always been, if you can speed him up as much as possible and make him rush things, that's when you're going to see the defensive impact on Jamal Murray. And I felt like in game 2, already talking about it like it's a playoff series because it feels inevitable.
I know. It's I like the baseball series. How do you feel about the baseball series that the NBA's been doing more of the last couple of years? Because I kind of like it. I like to see the different adjustments that teams make, feeling one way about a matchup and then things shift, like whatever. Or
I love it. I'm with you. I think it's the best. It's one of my favorite ways for games to happen, where it's like, I feel like you get to dive into, during the regular season, you get to dive into games a little bit more when you have, okay, I'm going to get a sample size of 2 games from these 2 teams where I can really like sink my teeth into it and like try and figure out what they were doing and what adjustments they made. Cause it's like, if, the Kings play the Lakers in November and they don't play again until March, it's like, I don't even remember what happened in November. I got to go back and watch that game now. It's like, it's a lot easier to pay attention and lock into a matchup when you've got that back-to-back game, or not even necessarily a back-to-back. Even if there's like a day in between, I still think it's the best way to present the games, in my opinion. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
But the one more thing I will say about Jamal Murray is Jalen Williams, I think being out probably hurt some of this a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, I've got a lot of frustrations with Jalen Williams. A great player, drives me nuts sometimes. He is good when it comes to speeding guys up, particularly guys like Jamal Murray, who give him a ball screen.
He affects dribbles so much. He's
so freaking
at batting
long.
the ball away. Yeah. It's such a ridiculous, athletic profile. All of these guys are, right? They're athletic freaks. That's why they're, playing at the level that they're at. But J-Dub is, I think he's an insane defensive build. Because he's kind of like Dort, maybe not quite as strong, but he's incredibly strong, low center of gravity. And then he's got this enormous wingspan. And you're like, okay, what can you do on the perimeter? But then him guarding as a free safety too, as a help side guy. I think they really missed him in the second half of game game 2 of the second game of this series. Everything just felt a little bit freer. I liked the process that Denver was going through in both of these games. In particular, one of the things that stood out to me about the first game where they lost convincingly was Denver only had 7 turnovers in that game. And that's big because Denver has been turning the ball over nonstop since the All-Star break. And OKC is the best team at forcing opponent turnovers, live ball turnovers in particular, in the NBA. And I thought that they did a good job of just not playing around with the ball too much and getting the ball to open spots as quickly as possible. So I liked that aspect of Denver's game plan execution in both games, regardless of what OKC was doing defensively. What did you think of that, actually? Because I think that OKC's, as good as their paint defense is, I think that their best, sort of the most elite thing they do is pressure the ball and force turnovers by playing passing lanes and doing all the things that go into forcing turnovers, because that's the thing that makes teams so uncomfortable. It bothers process. And that's why I didn't actually feel quite as bad about the first game as a lot of people did, because it was again a convincing loss. I was just Denver didn't look like a team that was deviating from their process because of how OKC was defending them.
Yeah, Game 2 was Denver playing Denver's game. They looked comfortable with their process. They were doing what you would expect the Denver Nuggets to do. But in Game 1, the things that, the Jokic threes, for example, Jokic shooting 2 of 10 from 3. OKC's going to watch Jokic take 10 threes in a game, and they're going to be like, of course, that's the shot we want to give up. Yeah, he's a good 3-point shooter, but he's taking 10 threes. It's we know we're going to give it up. We know he's probably going to shoot 45% from 3, but he's only going to take 4 or 5. We'll live with that. He takes 10 threes, even better. And it's that's not their game. But giving Jokic the ball at the elbow, letting the help come off of the weak side and hitting that open shooter, it's that's their game. And yeah, you're going to turn it over a little bit, but your process is what has gotten you so much success in the first place. And when you stick to that, you're going to have a lot more success. It's Denver's one of the best half-court offenses in the league for a reason. And it's because they have a game plan that works. And this is where the balancing act between process and stubbornness is so interesting if you're a coach. It's we have this process that works really, really, really well, but OKC is really good theoretically at disrupting our process. We're going to end up turning the ball over. No, you hear turnovers. You're oh, we don't want to turn the ball over, but it's yeah, but then you're not going to be able to do things the way that you do them. It's
right.
You can't change your entire philosophy and your entire approach just because of one matchup. It's you need to live with some of the mistakes and the failures that are going to come. It's the NFL is a great example when it comes to turnovers. It's yeah, you could have a quarterback that throws one interception per. Look at Josh Allen. Josh Allen, I guarantee you, he's going to throw an interception a game. He's going to fumble the ball a couple of times per game, but he's going to make plays. Jamal Murray's going to turn the ball over every now and then, but they're going to make plays.
Guys.
Exactly.
Essentially, yeah.
And with OKC, They're going to get in the passing lane every now and then. They're going to swipe down on a ball on a driver. But you got to live with it. You can't change your whole game plan just because you don't want OKC to get more turnovers. It's like, no, play your game. And Denver played their game and it worked.
It's interesting you mentioned that because it reminds me of a game that the Thunder had earlier this year. I believe it was the Knicks game in OKC. Knicks are up at half. The Thunder come storming back at the end of this game, and they take it in the clutch. And something that the Thunder did that a lot of teams do to disrupt the Knicks process was put Isaiah Hartenstein on Josh Hart. And so instead of running their normal stuff, whatever it is, because it's not like the Knicks have one thing that they do. They were running a lot of pick and roll with Josh Hart as the roller. They're like, well, Josh, I want to take Hart and drop and, attack him in space. And so to do that, we have to use Josh Hart as the roller. And I was really critical of Tibbs going to that adjustment because it's one thing to counter what another team's doing, with like, okay, we're adjusting to counter to that. But if it completely takes you out of what you do, and what ended up happening is Josh Hart is not able to make plays from the middle of the floor. I thought OKC defended those actions really well, and they weren't able to score, and that's how the Thunder got the win in that game. What it meant was Cat didn't touch the ball down the stretch of that game, once. There was one possession, I think, he gets a cross match in transition on and a seal, gets the ball, immediately scores. Didn't touch the ball the rest of the game. And I thought they were able to completely take him out of that game because I think the Knicks didn't do well enough I think your adjustments should always end up playing to your strengths. Like if something that the other team is doing is keeping the ball out of your best player's hands, your adjustments should be something that you do to get the ball back into your best player's hands and make sure that they're the ones making plays. So that actually brings me to my next question here, which has to do with, the same kind of concept. I've been incredibly skeptical and critical of teams that go small against the Thunder, whether it's taking their center off the floor or going 3-guard lineups, etc. But in this last game, obviously Denver shoots 56% from 3, and that definitely helps, right? But there's this Thunder fan account who he also does, playbacks, Jace Hoops, who suggested that going smaller around Jokic in that game actually helped Denver because it scuffed the game plan that OKC had, which was really centered around defending Jokic in the post, right? How do you feel about, that idea? When we talked so much about how Denver's main matchup advantage here is the size, but how do you feel about Denver, going small against OKC, and then more broadly this philosophy of adjusting, particularly for a playoff matchup, and what it means for, what it says about your personnel? Are you saying, well, the guys that we have aren't versatile enough in themselves when you do that? And do you end up taking your best players off the floor potentially when you do that?
I think there is some psychological games going on when you talk about, who's going to be the first to pull a guy who can only operate and drop.
Who's going to be the first time out?
Who's going to be the first one to take Zubats off the floor?
Yeah.
That whole year-old debate. Steven Adams, insert drop big here. That's always a story in the playoffs. And, it's important to make those adjustments. And like you said, and like we've discussed already, you can get married to those game plans too much and end up shooting yourself in the foot. You can keep Josh Giddey in the series for 3 more games than you should have and keep letting him shoot open corner threes. And then you end up in a Dallas Mavericks series where you guys end up getting bounced in the second round. And I look at a coach like Mark Daigneault and I'm like, those are the adjustments where I'm concerned of, where certain players, you don't need to change your entire process to take certain players off the floor. It's your process can still remain, like you said, you're not sacrificing your best players just to maintain your ability to have what's given you so much success. As far as going small goes, my specific concerns with OKC, it has a lot to do with Chet and his comfort level on the offensive end. Defensively, defensively, the Thunder are going to live and die by their game plan defensively. They have an identity, and whether it's Hartenstein on the floor, whether it's Chet on the floor, whether it's Jalen Williams, the other one on the floor, they're going to do their defense how they've done it, and they'll live and die by it. I don't see a ton of changes there. But offensively, we have this view of Chet, or at least, I say we in a very nebulous sense of like the general public has this view of Chet that he's this very, very efficient stretch big who, hardly misses. And I'm like, this is harsh language, but he is a much more timid offensive player than people realize. He is generally kind of scared to shoot. He does not have a quick release at all. He has an uncomfortable looking shot, even though the percentages.
Especially not now that Drew Hanlen's gotten to.
Yeah, don't even get me started on that. That scares me to death. But I look at Chet and like the idea of going small, and it's like, yeah, defensively, OKC's going to do their thing, but offensively, it's like Denver is already theoretically defensively deficient against this OKC team. But if Denver, an already an elite offensive team, doubles down on their offense, does OKC have the ability to keep up with that? The numbers, yeah, we can look at the numbers and be like, yeah, they've been one of the best half-court offenses in the league this year. They're like top 5 in half-court offense. It's like, yeah, but is that enough to keep up with small ball Denver Nuggets with Jokic on the floor in the playoffs? I don't know.
So in the game yesterday, we were just talking about this, if they're doing something that's like making your best player's life hard, you should do something to make your best player's life a little bit easier. And, the Nuggets were running all these high traps to get the ball out of SGA's hands. I felt like last year, and maybe it's also true this season, a lot of the time, like, this is not a new concept for teams guarding SGA. But a lot of the time when teams would run this, like Mark would just have someone else bring the ball up and get SGA moving off ball. And I think he's like a deadly off ball like attacker if you can create even like the tiniest window of space for him, right? They don't have, Josh Giddey was a bit more of a primary initiator creator and kind of took a little bit of that burden off of him, but he wasn't really like an advantage creator. He was able to just kind of make it easier for SGA to like get to his spots, right?
Right.
Not like having to give up the ball as soon as he crossed the timeline. Yesterday, the plan was to just move the ball, get it to the open guy, and have him take shots. And it worked. The Thunder had the exact same offensive rating in game 2 as they did in game 1. The exact same. It was like 128.3 offensive rating. And Dort made 8 threes, right? So like he did make Denver pay, but completely got Oklahoma City out of what they do. And they weren't really able to get back to that ever. How different is it actually to how Dallas really got the Thunder out of what they do in the playoffs? Because on the one hand, SGA was still going off in that series, but you didn't have everyone else. And obviously in this game that we're talking about versus Denver, it was the complete opposite. Or do you just not see, you saw it as like they didn't really make an adjustment. They just played right into what the defense was giving them.
There were a lot of instances where, specifically a lot of Alex Caruso possessions, where I was like, huh.
Yeah, there's a lot of Alex Caruso in that game.
I was like, what's that all about?
He's killing us right now.
And like, I look at the percentages for Alex Caruso in game 2, where like he was 5 of 8 from the field, 2 of 4 from 3. But like the thing that stuck out to me was he had 3 turnovers and he had the ball in his hands a lot. And I was like, why does Alex Caruso have the ball in his hands this much? And I think that speaks to Denver, not necessarily like you said, they had the same offensive rating that they had in the first game. But I think when you're able to cap a team like OKC at that 128 and you're an offense like Denver where your ceiling is so much higher. It's like if you are successful at keeping Shea from getting 20 shots in a game, if you are making Lou Dort take 16 shots and making Lou Dort get his game off, then yeah, you're not going to be able to keep up with an offense like Denver, especially when Denver is able to kind of mitigate some of your defense by going small and playing into the fact that you're not letting them get set, that you're playing with such a quick pace. All of that is stuff that I'm just like, yeah, the Thunder might just not match up super well, because not necessarily a bad matchup, but in terms of who they want to see in the playoffs, it's like Denver's pretty high on the list of teams they don't want to see, just because Denver has such a right hook that OKC is not, I don't want to say not capable of defending, but they can only defend it some of the time. And that's the beauty of Denver's offense to me, is like when it's on, and it really doesn't matter what you do.
I think like the Jamal Murray of all of this is really, really the important part of it. You can stop a team from getting open shots. Like you can contest everything, all of that. And I even think like, I mean, when Jokic's elbow was the way that it was on Sunday, because he just like couldn't hit a drop in the ocean. In that game from three or like from anywhere, he really struggled. I think he shot sub 40% from the floor in that game. But like when Jamal Murray is on, it's just like you can't let this guy get to his spots comfortably, because if he's on, then like those are just shots that you're like, what am I supposed to do about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk a bit about OKC's actual matchup advantages, right? Because we've talked about, all these things like, okay, this is what Denver could do. This is like something that gives Oklahoma City trouble. But OKC is the best, like in my opinion, best team in the league. The only reason that they don't have the best record right now is because Cleveland's in the East. Like I believe that very firmly. In a potential playoff series, SGA is a problem because, like you said, like, yeah, you can cap their ceiling at 128 offensive rating if, Dort hits 8 threes and all this, which, may not happen, but also could if everything is open. Like you're saying, if you leave shooters open, rhythm is a thing, and they're going to eventually, make those shots. But do you think that, considering how good OKC's defense is, and I do think that they're a little bit more versatile than maybe you're giving them credit for right now, even in a Denver matchup, but do you think that Denver's issues would be more offensive or defensive in that series, especially considering the state of their shooting right now? Like, yeah, they shot 56% from 3 one game, but they shot like 32% the game before and got waxed.
Yeah, I think one of the big advantages for OKC is like you look at the second half of game 1 and OKC just started pouring it on and there was nothing that could be done to stop it. With Denver, it's weird because they kind of have the opposite problem of like sometimes it takes a really long time to get going, but once they get going, they start pouring it on. Oklahoma City is going to be in a lot of opportunities in a theoretical playoff matchup where they can
play from ahead.
Bury Denver early, which I'm talking like 30-point leads, not 20. 20-point leads mean nothing in the NBA anymore. Like if OKC is able to get ahead early, I think that's something they're capable of doing, particularly when you look at the non-Jokic minutes. OKC is very well equipped to deal with that just by nature of having a lot of guys who can shoot. They can have J-Dub on the floor without Shea. Those minutes can be staggered. They've got like the simplicity of an Isaiah Joe and an Isaiah Hartenstein DHO that they can go to with more predominantly bench minutes.
Right. They have things they can go to, unlike Denver.
Yeah.
Bench. Like,
right. It's not like they're just praying like, oh, somebody do something.
Yeah.
They've got little pet actions that they can go to. And I think that helps a lot. The size is a factor for sure, but I think there is something to be said just for top to bottom defensive personnel, assuming guys like Jay Will are probably out of the playoff rotation. If I had to guess, he probably will be, or like a 10, 15 minute a game guy.
I want to ask you about that because big Jalen Williams, Jay Will, he started the second half in the second game of this baseball series in place of Isaiah Hartenstein. I think that Daigneault probably wanted to have him just popping more and have Jokic have to like guard someone out on the perimeter was the idea there. That worked in the first game, by the way. Like he was making all his threes. In the second game, he was not making his threes. But I thought Hartenstein was doing a really good job offensively, in particular in the first half of this last game. So I didn't really understand why Daigneault made that change. Was it just he likes to play around with things? Or was there something that you saw with the Hartenstein minutes in the first half that kind of justified that to you?
So I'm kind of with you. I don't understand it, but I do understand why it happened. In the sense that Daigneault has said incessantly, like he's been asked all year, like you play a lot of lineups and you play a lot of different lineups that sometimes don't make very much sense. Why? And he said, because I want to have as much data as possible and know exactly what every possible combination in every possible context looks like. Like he needs to see what something looks like in order to know, like, okay, does this have legs or not? And I think that was probably a situation where he was like, let's see what happens. Throw Jay Will out there and see what he can do. But the problem to me with Jay Will is not necessarily like offensively, you know, he's okay offensively. Like, yeah, if he hits his threes, cool. But that's kind of a hit or miss. Like he attempts 2 or 3 a night. It's not like a significant volume, not enough to meaningfully impact the team's spacing overall. Like he's going to be the guy getting helped off of. Yeah, he can make some decent passes. He's an okay DHO guy whenever he's looking to do that. But defensively is where I look at him and I'm just like, yeah, you might, get Jokic pulled out on the perimeter more, but what's he doing on the defensive end against Jokic? And it's less about what are you doing against Jokic, because I'll tell you what you're doing against Jokic. Nothing. It's Jokic. You're not stopping him. I don't care if it's Hartenstein out there. I don't care if it's I don't care if it's prime Hakeem out there. You're not stopping Jokic. But what does Jay Will mean for everybody else on the floor on Denver's offense? It's like he is slow-footed. He is not able to close out. He has some pretty poor off-ball defensive instincts. He's prone to falling asleep. That's where I look at him and I'm like, yeah, he might be marginally better offensively, but defensively the gap is just so wide and also plays into Denver's strengths so much. Where like Denver, they catch you sleeping for 1 second, they're at the rim. You're screwed. It's too late. That pass has already been made, and Peyton Watson is already dunking it. Aaron Gordon's already dunking it. Insert player here. They're already getting an open layup or a dunk, or they're getting an open shot. It's like Jay Will is just not equipped for those environments, especially against a team like Denver that is just so smart in the half court.
Yeah, I guess he kind of goes against the like fly around that makes the OKC's defense what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting. I always love hearing about everyone has their gripes about their team, even the Oklahoma City Thunder. It's funny that you mentioned Denver's bench, and we talked about like conceptually, OKC's bench has things that they can go to, and the non-Jokic minutes have been this perpetual scab that Denver's been trying to pick and figure out basically. But it feels like whenever they play the Thunder in particular, and there are some other teams in the league that that are similar, but it feels like the non-Jokic minutes are never as bad against the Thunder as against everyone else. For example, so far Denver has been able to in their 4 matchups this year, been able to play Zeke Naji, Hunter Tyson, Julian Strawther, and Jalen Pickett in those games largely without issue. Like if Denver loses the game, it's not really because of the non-Jokic minutes. And I'm curious if you think there's something about the Thunder that makes Denver's bench less vulnerable against OKC than they are against.
I don't know if it's something about Denver's bench specifically, but I've noticed this against other teams as well. It's glaringly apparent against Denver, just because you would think, oh, Jokic is off the floor. This is when teams go on big, massive runs. But it doesn't happen with OKC that much.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem. It certainly doesn't feel that way. I'm sure they have gone on, 10, maybe 15-point runs here and there, but it doesn't feel like that is a consistent factor in these matchups. And to me, it's because of kind of what we've been talking about, where like OKC's got this offense that like is the ceiling is really high, but that's the ceiling. It doesn't go past that. It's this, and it's not going to go much higher. And I feel like, to me, that is because, one, the way the rotations actually go, where like Shea plays, I think it's like 6 minutes in the first quarter, goes to the bench, 6 minutes in the sits the first 6 minutes of the second quarter, comes out last 6 minutes, something like that.
I think he's been playing the whole first quarters a lot, and then like sits the whole first 6 minutes of the second.
I think that's what it is.
Like, you don't have SGA versus benches when Jokic is also doing that. I think we used to do like last 2 minutes of the first quarter, maybe he'd come out, but now it's like Jokic the entire first. So, and that's been the case all year, which is partially why his minutes were kind of up for relative to beginning of the season kind of minutes load. But it also meant that like stars who had a similar substitution pattern weren't going against our bench, which maybe explains the slight increase in quality. Maybe that's too generous of the non-Jokic minutes this year.
I with OKC, the problem that I see is like you look at Shea and J-Dub specifically, where their games are, somewhat predicated on tough shot making. Not entirely. I don't want to diminish them to just like, oh, they're just tough shot guys. They don't get open looks. Like, they're both great drivers and can capitalize on space so well. And they can generate open looks for themselves at the rim a lot. Not taking that away, but when those guys aren't on the floor, and even when they are on the floor in things like the non-Jokic minutes, it's like, well, some of that is still just tough shot making. And like, if the shot's not going in, then you're not going to capitalize on the fact that Jokic isn't on the floor. And the same goes for like, okay, Jokic goes to the bench, Shea goes to the bench, J-Dub goes to the bench. None of those guys are on the floor. Jamal Murray's not on the floor.
Yeah.
Whatever the case is.
Non-SGA, non-Jalen Williams minutes in both of these games that didn't go well for OKC and Daigneault. And I don't know why they do that. I don't know why you guys do
Your guess is as good as mine.
But there'd be a timeout, and then Daigneault gets Jada back in the game like pretty quickly.
Well, it's like we talked about Isaiah Joe and Hartenstein DHOs, and it's like, yeah, you have that in the non-Jokic minutes, but that's still it's a high points per possession context, but it is still subject to, over the course of an entire game, streakiness.
Right.
It's like, yeah, you could shoot 0 of 3 on Isaiah Joe DHOs in the first half, and then shoot 3 of 4 in the second. And it's like, well, how many of those were the non-Jokic minutes, and how much did it allow you to capitalize on the fact that wasn't on the floor? Could you put the hammer down? And that's where I'm like, I have concerns about OKC against any team when stars aren't on the floor. It's like, how much are they able to build these leads that can actually put teams away in those environments?
I think that's a good point. Like, it's nice having Hartenstein being able to like kind of run those units with neither of J-Dub or SGA on the floor. He's really good as like a hub, but like you said, it's more subject to streakiness. Whereas maybe ironically, the tough shot making of Jalen Williams and SGA provides such a floor and like a consistency that doesn't let you like fall too far behind, even if they're missing some of those shots, right?
Right.
I really love that discussion about this matchup. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about OKC and Denver potentially having a playoff series? Like, maybe they meet in the Western Conference Finals. They're currently 1 and 2 in the West right now. I think that would be a very interesting series. Incredibly scary for me, because I just think OKC has shown themselves to be the overall, better team right now. Even though we've discussed the flaws and vulnerabilities in both of these teams, it's really just about who can maximize the thing that they do best more.
Well, that's kind of why I am excited. The last thing I'll say about this series or potential series is that's why I think it's so exciting, because yes, adjustments will be made, but I think it will be, like we discussed, a lot of adjustments that play into maximizing what you do really well and keeping the ball in the hands of your best players. And like I look at, I don't know if your audience is, if you're a UFC fan or if your audience is any UFC fans out there, but it was, I think it was Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje, but there was a point at the end of that fight where Max Holloway just like pointed at the center of the ring, and he was like, we're going to throw hands for the last round of this match till one of us gets knocked out. And I feel like that's how it will be for OKC and Denver, where it's just like, we're going to go blow for blow, and like my best look versus your best look, and we're going to see who wins. And I think that's just heavyweight title fight.
It's really nice to hear a Thunder fan talk about it like that, because over in Nuggetsville, there's been a lot of doom and gloom, as well as some delusional optimism in my opinion. But you know, Denver, like every time I think they're out, they pull me back in, right? Like you can never really count this team out. But there's been this looming question all season that we should probably get to of, you know, does this team look like a first round exit? Does this team look like a team that, you know, yeah, they can win a lot of regular season games, but they have all these glaring red flags, right? They have struggled to be top end competition this season, not winning against the exception of the Thunder, not really winning against, say, top 3 seeds in either conference. They did beat the Lakers once, but that was when the Lakers were a hot dumpster fire. So I wanted to go through and talk about the potential at this point, because of where the standings are, the potential first round matchups for Denver, you know, regardless of where they sit. They're probably going to finish somewhere in the top 3 in the West, and face the 6th or 7th seed. And that's still in flux too. Like who's going to finish in that spot. Okay. So the first team I want to talk about is the Warriors, where if the season ended today, Denver would actually be playing the Golden State Warriors. Actually, no, I wrote that when Denver was the 3 seed 2 days ago. Now they're the 2 seed, but the Warriors could end up 7. And they have been on a roll lately. They only have 1 loss with Jimmy in the lineup since they acquired them. They did have 1 loss without him as well. I think that was the Sixers game. And Denver over the last couple of years has had a lot of success guarding their offense, and generally slowing down, not shutting down Steph Curry, right? And basically doing what every other team does, try to make anybody but Steph beat you. Do you think that Jimmy Butler meaningfully changes that matchup specifically for the Nuggets because of how they defend and how much attention they happen to throw at Steph Curry?
Yes, in the sense that it's Jimmy Butler next to Steph Curry, but my question with Golden State and Steph and Jimmy has been, is that enough when your supporting cast is like just fine? Like they're fine. Yeah. They're totally fine. But what is the ceiling on the team outside of Jimmy and Steph? Like, do they have enough to handle that? Like, is that a good enough team to beat a championship caliber team like Denver, like I believe Denver is? This is a series where could totally be a 7-game series, but I would still really like Denver's chances because they would have the best player on the floor, which just is so ridiculously important in the playoffs. Like if you have the best player in the world or the best player in a series, you have a much better chance than the other team. It doesn't matter how good the other team is. And so when I think about that, and I think about, Jimmy and Steph, they're amazing. But everyone else is kind of just like, cool, they're fine. Yeah. They're good players. Draymond Green's still Draymond Green to a lesser extent than he used to be. And then they've just got a bunch of role players who are totally fine. And I'm like, is that enough to beat the best player on the planet? I personally don't think so, but it's Steph Curry.
And like, just speaking on the matchup, I think that this team is just still way too small to guard Denver effectively.
I completely agree.
And that's why I'm just like, I think Denver's just going to be able to score in this matchup. this is one of the teams that Denver's bench struggles against a lot. Like those non-Jokic minutes are very tough. I'm like, why can't you guys guard all these actions? The whole idea of switching 1 through 5 is to stagnate things. But Golden State does such a good job of capitalizing on any kind of defensive mistake that that's a matchup where you see, regardless of how people think about Jokic's defense this year, last year, whatever, having him on the floor just in that communication aspect, that you need him there in this matchup in particular. So the Houston Rockets were looking pretty serious earlier in the year. They have fallen like so far from grace in the standings. They were second in the conference at one point. I think like early January that was true. But a lot of that is because of their offense. You know, Jalen Green has definitely not fallen off a cliff, but he's not playing at the like he was just like younger Zach LaVine for a stretch there. Also, they're like the best offensive rebounding team in like maybe NBA history, and they're still doing that. But the first shot offense is just too bad to to keep up with their competition right now, and so they've fallen. I think they're 5th in the standings right now, and I'm really curious where they're going to finish because that first round matchup, I think they have a better chance against certain competition than others. But if there is anything that Denver or whoever the Rockets end up facing would have to specifically game for against the Rockets with their offense, like what would it be? And that's the question I keep coming to with Houston.
I think that's probably the question everyone's having with Houston, where it's like that offense. I mean, it's not good. It's a bad offense, and they acknowledge that. It's like, yeah, we're going to shoot poorly from 3 and 2. And we're not going to create a ton of clean looks, but we're going to get like 50-second chance opportunities because we get so many offensive rebounds. And against a lot of teams, that's going to go really well for you, and you'll get a lot of regular season wins. But in the postseason, against a team specifically in the context of discussing a potential Denver Nuggets matchup, that's one of the teams where I'm like, your strength isn't really as meaningful anymore because Denver is also a good rebounding team. They're also a good offensive rebounding team. They can win the possession battle against you and keep up with you on the boards, not just with Jokic, but with like Christian Brown being a hustle guy, with Peyton Watson being a hustle guy. Like they've got all these guys who can fly around the floor and get a bunch of rebounds. And Houston just, to me, doesn't have enough to overcome. The experience is really important, but also just their strength, which is, I hate using this word, no disrespect to Houston because they've been one of my favorite stories this year, but their somewhat gimmicky strength of, yeah, we're just going to get a ton of offensive rebounds and that's going to help us win a lot of games. It's like, yes, in the regular season, that will do wonders for you against teams that are either not really trying to win games or teams that they're not really worried about getting offensive rebounds right now. But against Denver in a playoff setting, it's like, I value Denver's experience, the foolproofness of their offense, the fact that Houston doesn't really have strong rim protection. They have good defense, but with Amen Thompson potentially being out, coming off of an injury, I'm like,
I didn't mention at the top.
I tell you what they're going to do. They're going to pull Şengün out on the perimeter and they're going to back cut the Rockets to death. And if Amen Thompson isn't back, then I just don't, it's all about Houston's second line of defense for me. And with Amen Thompson being up in the air right now, I'm just like, I don't know if this team has the personnel to handle a top 5 postseason half court offense.
So, I mean, you kind of answered this question in your answer, but I wanted to just touch on it more specifically. Is Houston's athleticism, particularly on the wings, like you talked about all of these guys, with Amen being out, but they still have Tari Eason, they still have Jabari Smith Jr., they still have, Dylan Brooks has his own like particular kind of athleticism. Is that a particular concern for Denver, given Denver is, like, they have some younger guys, but they're coming off the bench for the most part, the exception of Christian Brown. Denver can be kind of slow sometimes. And we did see in the first matchup against these with these two teams in January, like Denver got run out of their own gym on a back-to-back, which yes, normally would be a thing with teams, but otherwise Denver has been nails on back-to-backs. So that game has stood out to me. And this was a game without Jokic. So you'd imagine like Denver should be quicker at least, but it was like, yeah, getting beaten by a team that was playing really well at the time is one thing, but they got run out of their gym.
With the athleticism, it's a factor, but also I over the years I've become very low on like get out and run teams, and even like, athleticism in a half court setting helps you, but it doesn't help as much if your guys aren't shooting the ball, because it's like, even though Denver is a little bit slower in terms of the defensive side of the ball, some of that won't matter as much when it's like, yeah, they're slower to close out on a guy, but they know they're not going to shoot it. Yeah, you might give up 2 points, but you're not giving up 3. And even if they do shoot it, your shooters are unreliable. The athleticism factor to me is a Band-Aid over the bullet wound that is Houston's half-court offense to me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you about Houston. I do think that, let's say that it's like Golden State, Houston in the first round. I would probably pick Golden State in that series, but I do think that Houston's athleticism, particularly for a team that's both slow and small, could be an issue that like stretches the series longer than it should. Against most other teams that are at the top of the West right now, I don't think that Houston's formula would really fly. Because there's so many like bigger teams now that are in the top 6 of the West, even top 7 when you look at where the Timberwolves are right now. All right, last team that we're going to cover is the Memphis Grizzlies. They're kind of weird. They're a top 10 defense as of right now, and that's pending Jaren's return from his injury. They've been a top 5-ish offense, top 6 for most of the year, despite being just 15th in half-court offense. I think they're the worst half-court offense of all the top 10 offenses. But they're top 3 in transition. And I think it's fair to say that Jaren has really surpassed Ja as the best player on that team because of what he's been doing on both ends of the ball. And I think that really says as much, if not more, about Jaren's growth as Ja's progression. And Ja has also like recently sort of come on in, a few games recently, especially at the end. Like he's like a clutch merchant now. But when it comes to Jaren in particular, as much as I think Denver misses KCP for smaller perimeter players, I do think that because of the way that Ja gets to his shots, if Denver really locks in, they can probably guard him well, at least well enough to shut down Memphis's overall offense because of the way that they play with their scheme. Like it's more predictive. Like if you know that it's coming, it's pretty predictable. But Jaren is just a really good player now. He's a pretty good, half-court shot creator, like for himself. He's good on bailout possessions. He's a good spot-up guy. And obviously he does a lot on the defensive end. I wrote this question down sort of tongue-in-cheek, but can Denver even keep him from getting to his left hand? Like, would he actually be the biggest thing that Denver has to game plan for in a series?
I think so, yeah. And I don't know if anyone can keep him from getting to his left hand, honestly. But like you said, their offense is... the big thing for them is I would be skeptical of their ability to adjust over the course of a series because that's something Taylor Jenkins has been criticized for. And Michael Malone has proven to be a very sound coach when it comes to his postseason adjustments, and he's got a lot of experience.
Alex, could you look directly into the camera when you say that?
Is this how controversial is this?
This is for Nuggets Twitter.
I think Michael Malone's a good coach. I don't know. I think he's made good adjustments in the playoffs in the past.
No, but go on.
No, I just think there's a big coaching advantage there, and I don't think the Grizzlies are inflexible, but I am skeptical of how flexible they are.
Yeah, I kind of agree. One of the things with them is that they have all these guys who can play. No question, right? But it's not necessarily like, oh, we have this problem and we have this guy, X guy off the bench that is like a problem solver. It's just like another guy that you can plug in. To where I kind of wonder, like, do they know both what their best punch is and what their adjustments would be, even if Taylor Jenkins wanted to make them,
Right.
both personnel wise and schematically, right? Because adjustments aren't just about changing the rotations, obviously. And I'm really curious to see what the Nuggets Memphis games. I think we have 2 more games against Memphis the rest of this season, because we did have a baseball series with them earlier in the year, lost the first one, won the second one. It was just like play transition defense and you can win the game, and they did, and they won. But I'm curious to see what, the next game against Memphis actually looks like, because we didn't have Jokic for those first 2 games. So that's always interesting. We haven't seen the Jokic-Edey, matchup yet. They have so many young players on that team. So that's, that's another aspect of this. As much sort of preliminary playoff experience as Memphis has, they are such a young team. It's funny me talking to a Thunder fan saying that it's just kind of like, I'm interested to see how these guys do, and what kinds of how they're going to respond to the pressure of that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Alex, thank you so much for coming on the show today. This was such a fun discussion. It's really nice, actually, like really nice talking to a Thunder fan and hearing someone have like reference for my team that I've been kind of shitting on all year.
First of all, thank you guys for having me. Really enjoyed talking hoops, and I've been labeled as like the most pessimistic Thunder fan, so I'm always the I guess devil's advocate when it comes to the Thunder. So I'll happily wear that hat.
I vaguely recall a quick like discussion that we had during the Dallas Mavericks series where you were like, why isn't Daigneault calling a timeout during these runs that the Mavs are going on? And I said, like, because Daigneault knows that as soon as Lively leaves the floor, the Thunder are going to go on a run of their own. I don't know if he actually knew that, but that was basically like where the series was decided, was how many minutes is Lively playing versus Gafford and vice versa.
Right.
Well, if you like our content, please remember to click the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. Leave us a review. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Our social links are in the description. Thanks again, Alex, for coming on the show. And, maybe you'll enjoy this, but our closing tagline is to always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks.
Love it.